In the last episode of the meta history, we just ended off with patch 9.0 dropping, having the intention of nerfing back the main weapons of the midline meta we've had for about a year now. Today, let's take a look back on what those changes were and what developed as we head into the end game of Splatoon 3. Be sure to subscribe for more, and let's catch up to the modern day. Patch 9.0 dropped on August 30, 2024, in just about 2 years after the game's original launch. And outside of a Dreadringer bug fix slightly increasing the range and velocity of jump shots, yeah, that was a bug, everything else was a nerf. There's a lot to go over in this patch compared to any others, so let's start with our cooler overlords, Edit and Pencil. Both of these got a small but noticeable decrease in painting power. While short-range weapons won't really be as competitive with these two despite the nerfs, the reduced cooler output overall felt more balanced and forced a more active playstyle, which helped both weapons feel more fair. Though in terms of their spot in the meta, not much would change for them. The next least harsh nerf was Slosher, getting 1 less shot and 10 more points for special. This slightly reduced the weapon's uptime and special output, which put it more in line with other midlines in those areas, but other than that didn't really do much drastic damage. However, the two midlines with the most drastic nerfs were Range Blaster and Squeezer. Range has been growing in popularity for a while, even despite Kraken nerfs, and was a particular menace in tower control solo ranked. On top of the expected radius nerf from 3.5 to 3.3, putting it in line with other blasters, it also had its radius have reduced paint and 210 on the Kraken kit. Those two latter changes definitely feeling like a little bit of overkill, but combined with the 5-frame Kraken nerf from before, dealt a huge hit to the weapon. However, it definitely survived. Even after this patch, it was still able to do well in tournaments, and in particular saw use in the King's Cup, a Nintendo tournament in Japan, but would no longer be the best blaster. Though that's getting ahead of ourselves. Squeezer was even harsher, with shots having less range and shot velocity, and the main having less mobility. This made its advantage much less oppressive, thankfully, even though it still held a range advantage over most other midlines. It also managed to survive, and if anything did even better than Range Blaster. But its status as the best main weapon in the game was gone. The devs finally, a year later, heard the Zuka debate and decided to stop Panic Zukas by nerfing it by 5 frames. Yeah, so in Splatoon 1, it was nerfed by this much. That's a little bit low, but it at least did hurt Zuka weapons a little bit. If anyone saw these nerfs and was doubting that they would be impactful though, the Sendu Season 4 finale, which was a major tournament in the Western scene happening just a few days after this patch, would solidify it, as the main team expected to win the event, which had both a range and squeezer user, ended up losing. Though obviously the weapons were not the only factor. It became clear from there, in the viewer's perspective, that these weapons were no longer as oppressive as before. That said, why do I feel like I'm missing a weapon here?
Oh yeah, sort of forgot the obvious question there, but how did you survive?
Yeah, so you might have realized I haven't mentioned Stamper, which I've been talking about for a while as being considered a powerful midline, yet it's somehow completely absent here. While we're never gonna know for sure why Stamper managed to survive this patch, my guess would be that since Squeezer had a good matchup into it and was so much more common, paired with Stamper's insane difficulty, there was just a lack of good active Stampers in competitive play and X-rank leaderboards, which probably signaled the weapon already dropping off beforehand, along with the devs not wanting to nerf it too hard, which resulted in it being unscathed in this patch. One more thing before 9.0 was done. You know that new bow they added with some niche uses and being good in Rainmaker? Yeah, they nerfed its paint too for some reason. Not huge damage, but very unnecessary and random. Oh well. So what happened after this patch? In the Western scene in particular, we saw some more roller-centric comps. These were paired with End Splash for the high paint output and strike cover, as well as a 52 or even better down the line, Mid Decavitator, which exploited the old midline comps, which while still being tried had a hard time dealing with the high amount of sharking and self-sufficient weapons here, basically resulting in a very unfun game of hide and seek. Though there was one more style, which was my personal favorite at the time, Dive. Using Sword's unchanged power with weapons like Dooley or Tetra paired with a Junior or Zimmy, you had a fast rushdown style with very active specials that still had a good mix of fighting power, which saw some prominent success in the first few months, with the most notable result being the Season 5 Sendukyu finale, which did end up losing to a smart Vanilla Blaster counterpick, taking advantage of all the short-range weapons. During this time, we saw plenty of other underrated main weapons seeing use. While I mentioned Mitt earlier, it was proving itself even more with Squeezer being toned back. While it was a fine weapon before, it serves much better now with its added flexibility as a strong bubble option between Stamper and Roller, with the Dash Slash having a lot of mix-up options between different angles, overcoming the weapon's speed issues. Other notable weapons that saw some experimental use include Junior and Dooley that I mentioned earlier, but also E-Leader getting second place in an area cup later on, Dapple's winning a few events, and same for Dooley Sculpture, which used a unique Roller splash comp with a bit of chip damage and utilized the weapon's high ability to bait for Roller, getting second in the King's Cup. We also saw Fling's a Roller. This paired with Edit for a little bit more aggression and served to remind people that missiles were still pretty damn good. More short-range shooters saw some use as well, like Shot and V-Splash challenging Neo Splash. As the developments continue to happen over the upcoming months though, we also saw the next balance patch to accelerate some trends. We're now back to a patch that's more buff focused. This on its own pushed a few weapons to seeing more niche uses right away, since the buffs were a lot more focused in areas that were needed. Our first example is Luna Blaster, which after 7 years finally got a meaningful blast radius buff. This one doesn't count, which paired with a strong vanilla kit of Splat Bomb 170 Zipcaster got it some niche use cases for the first time in a while. Splatana Wiper also saw some occasional use as a more mobile option and the best torp weapon in the game, but it's been struggling for a while due to Hammer, and a small buff to its Charge Slash definitely helped, which we saw primarily during the Season 6 Sendukyu finale. And finally, Splattershot got a tad more range and painting range to help B-Shot compete. Not sure that was super needed, but whatever. The devs stated that the Splattershot and Splattershot Pro buffs were benchmarks that might adjust future similar weapons. We'll have to see what that means with future patches down the line. We did see some nerfs here though. Zimmy and Mint got increased bubble charges, even if both would stay relevant, and while it did get some combat and mobility buffs, the Fizzy Bomb having drastically lower paint output hurt Machine and Tri Nouveau. The most notable part of this patch though is the Booyah Bomb buffs. Charging faster with a larger radius and the ability to break bubble much faster, this brought a few more weapons into the spotlight, especially since it served dual purpose between HP and survivability and displacement and paint. This primarily helped the new strongest blaster, S-Blast 91. This weapon has always had a strong archetype and a lot of history. I did 2 whole videos on its rise over the past 2 years for more detail on it, but recently a larger radius, faster mobility, and a Booyah Bomb buff really solidified it. But to understand what made it so strong, we have to talk about what actually won in the battle for a new meta. Out of all the styles, we have a real winner, Midline Meta 2. The main weapons were still a bit weaker than before, but more options were viable and alternative styles had more reason to be used. However, the main difference was having a heavier focus on coordination due to chip damage and survivability becoming more important. By using many weapons that had easy synergy with each other, you had a lot of devastating options for fast fights with high sustainability tools afterward. The support was the most obvious spot that changed, with the winner being V-Splash. We've really come full circle. While more than fair nowadays in terms of balance, its sub and special provide the ability to work with anything and more combo potential, with the role no longer suffering from needing to be a paint bot like it did in the previous midline meta. It also had Crab, arguably the strongest special for a while now, and while it did get nerfed, a lot of players have gotten better within 2 years, particularly in using certain techs like a faster turn option. You can check out Shadow's guide if you want more info on the crazy things Crab was able to do.
Look at this, man. I am done for.
This weapon was the perfect glue to work with others, though some other supports we saw some use of were things like Shot for breaking Crab, and Splash for more selfish weapons like Roller or Squeezer, and even a bit of Dread used by me, and Grand Roll in Japan. This weapon had some big slider buffs, giving it a massive 70 radius, consistent main weapon damage that was very easy to work off of, and allowed you to play a support with more of a midline focus, giving it more paint range and fighting power. Though with the downside that while its special was able to counter HP options, it was rather inconsistent and unfitting for the role, leaving it as a mostly niche pick for now. While Pen still easily worked with these options for the cooler weapon, Edit has now fully caught up, working better with and against HP specials due to its better object damage, and having its mobility be much more useful for being active on the map. The indirect shifts of this metagame put it closer to Pencil, even if it was still worse. Last up in terms of roles is the midline one, with the most prominent duo being Stamper and S-Blast. Stacking in a triple burst and 3 specials to help with survivability gave it so many combos to work with while having many one-shots, AoE to cover, and a long-range pressure. Working a bit better with Edit for consistency, which won at the first Area Cup we saw it in, though it also won with Pencil in the Sendu-Q Season 6 Major in the West. In terms of other powerful midline options, I mentioned Mid earlier, but its higher damage made it more consistent with combos, and of course, Slosher still thrived with a good 70 damage and Strike being great for entry, though compared to other options, the lack of a special to add survivability made it a little bit less flexible. 3 months after this, patch 9.3 dropped. This didn't drastically change things, so I'm gonna cover this fairly quickly. Dooley's got a slightly larger standing shot size that helped accelerate the weapon being a more consistent pick, this time mainly in the shooter slot alongside Mint or Stamper primarily. This was basically a more mid-range fighting weapon focused version of Dive. S-Blast, despite getting plus 10 points for special, was still being further solidified as a fast mobility option, with its short range mode and burst bombs being amazing at having versatile options for any situation. Mint got a 2-frame nerf to the delay before it dashes. However, through testing, we found that the dash itself is 2 frames faster, making the kill time unchanged, which isn't mentioned at all in the official notes. Most good decavs will try to charge from cover, so the faster dash slash is honestly a buff here. The paint nerf is the main thing though, and it does tone it back fairly. But despite this, the weapon doesn't drop off that much. Pencil would also get another points for special nerf and slate paint nerf, which further closed the gap between it and Edit, but it would still remain the more common pick of the two. This patch also had 2 big special weapon changes that influenced things. Zuka got a much smaller 53 hitbox, with the same radius size now being only 35 damage, as well as had slightly less duration. This heavily reduced V-Shot as a support and slightly nerfed Zuka's slaying weapons like Squeezer, but the change was definitely still overall positive. It didn't kick any weapons out of the meta, and Zuka was very overtuned. Stamp got basically the opposite change, with its throw mode now having a giant hitbox and 60 hitbox. This wasn't a great special still, but it had much more utility, mainly contributing to slightly more Wiper and Vimy, since Mini Splatling also got a solid main weapon buff at this time, and it had Burst Bomb, which is quite valuable right now. Honestly, neither option would be that insane or common, but in general, Hammer had a lot more use cases that made most weapons with it feel better. Besides that, in terms of relevant changes, the shot buffs from last patch ended up applying to Spray Shooters and Dapple Doolies. It didn't really help them to majorly change anything, but I think the changes are overall fine. In other notable buff news, Recycle Brella's paint made it feel a lot more usable, and Paintbrush's Fire Rate one was nice all around, even if none of them would be major here. Overall, 9.3 was an extremely minimal patch. It still had a good overall impact on the game, but the meta is basically unchanged here. The end result of these balance changes was a midline meta that directly improved on what came before, remixing things in a way that's more balanced and to this day sees new options doing well while the core is less restrictive, more interactive, and has a higher focus on coordination that people missed. Overall, the devs really did it. They handled nerfs in so much of a better way than Splatoon 2 and left the endgame in the best spot it's ever been in. And we'll have to see where the more spread out patches take this game. When those are finally done, it'll be time to wrap up this series, at least for Splatoon 3. But until we get there, it looks like that's where we'll be leaving things for now. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. It's been an honor to do this again, and I hope you all enjoyed. By the way, I have talked about what makes this meta so good before, so if you want even more detail about it, here's one more video plug. See ya.